So, Rob, thank you so much for being with me.
It's my pleasure, Jessa. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me
I,
on.
I always want to start with why is this your passion? What is it you do and why, what brought you to this work and what drives you about it?
It's a great starting point for sure. I could say that what brought me to this work is like a personal hunch or at times a kind of nagging background feeling that's been present since I was a little kid of like I want more meaningful connection. I want to feel better. I want to have a good time. There was something in me that I think didn't really just get with the program that I think a lot of people just kind of take on as kids, where there's so much discomfort and there's so much kind of limitations and challenges with intimacy that as a culture, I think we've basically normalized and
Right.
rationalized. But I think our bodies and little kids who are so much more in their bodies and often haven't learned to not trust their body intelligence are in that sense of feeling of like, this is weird. Being around that person's weird. Being in this environment doesn't feel good. And then we end up kind of rationalizing that away. And for better or worse, I think it was a burden for so much of my life, but taking it seriously has ultimately led me to asking a lot of questions and doing some really deep investigation of, well, I could say broadly is just like what's possible for people, what's
Hmm.
worthwhile. And the topic of sex and sexuality and intimacy being a very central part of my relational being or whatever words I could throw out there, and some sense of just like the model of sex that I learned did not feel good. It didn't fulfill this yearning or this compulsion to have a certain sort of satisfaction and fulfillment. And I think so many people experience that and are in cycles of release and depletion, not really realizing that they're not particularly satisfied, that there's just this sense of tension, release, routine, whatever, but that real feeling or yearning towards something that is truly fulfilling and feels complete and whole is missing. But we don't ever really get horny enough to realize because we're just in these cycles of letting it go,
Hmm.
especially for men. I think it's similar and different for female-bodied folks, but I
Yeah.
think this is an exceptionally common thing for men.
So I don't know if you can articulate this. Maybe you probably can much better than me, but how do you even define sexual fulfillment or how can you speak to what the potential is
Hmm.
for people? I don't know how you put words to that, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't know definitively, but we can play around and see what happens while we're here. So I have a theory, or at least it's a fun story to play inside of, that sexuality is seeking to resolve itself somehow. That there is actually, like, we could think about it as like, there is a thing that, like, scratches the ultimate itch. And I think that that has to do with our urge to merge and experience a sense of unity with another person. And I think it also has to do with the global neurological and experiential phenomenon of orgasm. And I think that's, as far as I can tell, like that's the thing that we're all trying to get at. And
okay.
the relief of a peak orgasm is something that a lot of people go to more or less accidentally because we don't know any better. But that sense of having a energetically cohesive global orgasm in a shared experience of unity with another person, I think is the thing that we're more or less all going for. And, maybe this is the time where I'm supposed to say like different strokes for different folks and we're all different. And like maybe, how does the thing that I'm proposing accommodate people's variation? And I appreciate that. And then there's also a part of me that wants to take a stand for not that. And, not to be contrarian, but to also say, like, maybe that's just missing the point of us really owning that this is real, that there's something
Hmm.
in us that's really longing for that. And maybe it's universal. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't prove that, but it's a theory that I have that it seems like more or less there is a sort of this idea of sexual completion is something that I've played around with a bit in my work, and it usually gets people excited just hearing those words smushed together in that phrase. And yeah, it's a super interesting thing to think about. Like what is the intelligence in us really seeking? And I do think that there's slight I don't know your audience or I don't know you and your body of work so much, but I do believe or perceive that there are differences between the feminine and the masculine, and that these are things that are not like contingent on people's gender or biological sex, but are more like universal forces or
Hmm.
principles. And I do think that there are fundamental masculine sexual needs and fundamental feminine sexual needs. And, I could also argue that creating a binary is also limiting and constraining, but like yada, 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 we're playing
Right,
around
right.
with
I
frameworks
know.
because they're helpful. Like
Right, right.
I've played around all over the map, and this seems to be pretty useful. And there's a lot of legacy around why, different traditions through time have used this sort of cosmological model of stuff.
Hmm.
Anyways, on a very practical level, it does seem like there are certain, let's say, needs or things that the feminine is looking for in that process. And there are things that the masculine is looking for in that process that are kind of the building blocks of what a holistic sexuality is made out of and the play between those two things. So, yeah, I'm just kind of jamming here a bit, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing too between, trying to give people sort of permission to be themselves and people can be different, but also like, where do we settle or normalize less than? I just get used to that, put the bar too low.
yeah, and I really like this idea that like if you deconstruct things and you don't have a different orientation, it's just kind of a digression into unstructured chaos. And I'm all about chaos, but I think that there's a certain point where it's not super practical. Like I have spent an extraordinary amount of time exploring sex from the perspective of like maybe I have no idea what this is, and how can I completely, as if I'm just like an alien avatar who has no idea what humans are, and I've never seen anybody fuck, and I have no idea what this is, and it's just like what is this, and like what is the impact of this body on me, and what am I compelled to do, what are my impulses, and trying to really investigate sexuality from this blank space of forget what sex is and actually have an emergent process of discovery. And I think that that's an impossible task, but I think it's a super interesting one. And
Right.
if it's something that people haven't tried, I think it can be tremendously fruitful, if only to realize how much we're running scripts, how much we're running. It's like, oh, I learned the choreography of sex, and now I'm like double clicking on like foreplay exe. And then later I'm gonna click on like penis and vagina fucking exe.
Right.
I know what it is. And it's like, for
Well, I
one,
mean, our whole brain is built to automate, right? Run scripts, automate, barely be present so much of the time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it brings up things for me about like the difference between innate sexual intelligence and the influences of sexual culture.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think is really important. And I used to be way more in the camp of like, fuck all that culture stuff. This is just about our instincts and our primal body intelligence. And I also have seen that like that wasn't even really true when I thought it was true.
Right.
There's also something huge about the lineages of rich sexual practice. And I think a lot of the lineages that people are indoctrinated into are pretty shitty and like don't actually result in meaningful experiences for people. It's just like really pornified and has undertones of religious indoctrination and is very like Hollywood like spectacle.
Hmm.
It doesn't really result in people having meaningful sexual lives. So it makes sense that a lot of folks who get really nerdy about this can go in the direction of like, okay, like let's just forget all of that and try to reclaim something that's purely instinctual or whatever. But there's a lot of important information in the lineages, and to really honor the people that have come before us and the tremendous wisdom that is in these different spiritual traditions is, I think it would be impossible for one, but also just like extremely ineffective and inefficient way to really learn about human sexual potential and what's good and worthwhile if we didn't, pay homage and consider what these different traditions have found. And that's all so complicated, but I've found that there's just so much profound wisdom in different traditions, both in the West and in the East.
Yeah.
It's like stuff that people have worked out. It's like, yeah.
So, what are some of those themes? Maybe rather than go through each tradition and educate us all about that, but like, what are the common elements or themes that you find in all those traditions where we could take that learning?
Yeah. Well, there's a theme. Maybe this is abstract. Let's see where it goes. It's the first thought that pops into my head is that there's a explicit and implicit theme in Tantra and Taoist sexual alchemy that relates to the the balancing or merging or the integration of contrary forces.
Okay.
And there's all right, so there's so many directions that we can go with
I
that one.
know, I know.
One of them is like I think it's super interesting to think about how sex is so it's so much about merging and it's so much about the other person, but in another way, if you don't have a self-involved individual experience, then you're not really in the game either.
Right,
And
right,
there's also something so fundamental about when talking about the nature of the feminine that it seems pretty clear that the feminine likes to be enjoyed. So even if you're just focused on something like female pleasure, if you're not enjoying the woman as much as you can, you're not doing her a favor.
right, right,
Like
right,
there's something fundamental about feminine sexual fulfillment that has to do with being enjoyed. And there's a paradox that in my work we talk about the selfish, selfless paradox, that if you actually want to be as selfless as you possibly can and be in a purely devotional orientation to your lover, that enjoying them as much as humanly possible is perhaps one of the greatest expressions of devotion. And ironically, to be in the process of your own self enjoyment, I think we have to have an element of selfishness and an element of being self possessed and self
right,
involved that actually facilitates intimacy. And this is one thing that I think people they don't understand this. I think that a lot of people really don't understand this and that they, okay, so we're starting to kind of get into some things that are pretty cool and interesting to talk about where like I think people relate to sex in a way that's highly transactional and they don't understand the nuance and kind of reciprocity of these dynamics that are really baked into the intelligence of sexual exchange and of the play of all of it. So, this thing again, like the selfishness paradox is a really pure example of that and how we need to both be in this sort of relational, generous frame while also being connected to our own self-interests.
right,
And I think a lot of people really go one way or the other, and there's a lot of transactionality that happens between us and a lot of stuff related to self-worth and self-esteem and um yeah,
yeah.
there.
It's interesting. I talk a lot about the importance of selfishness in good sex. Like it's, and
Yeah.
it sometimes takes convincing people, that this give them permission or something.
For sure. I think that there's also influences of what does it mean to be a good feminist, or what does it mean to really honor the feminine and hold female pleasure rightfully, especially given the legacy of just astoundingly dark things that have happened for our species in the past.
Yeah,
Makes sense that there would be a natural pendulation to be like, okay, well, like since there's been so much objectification and gnarly shit happening to women, sexually speaking, and far beyond that through time, how like what is the rightful place? Being like, okay, well then let's just focus on her pleasure, but that can end up being very mechanical and doesn't really
right, right,
understand the kind of energetics of sex that are required for us to explore our sexual potential.
right.
And I can say that I've experienced time and time again and had plenty of clients and students come back to tell me that the feminine has opened into orgasm from nothing other than being enjoyed. like from literally no genital stimulation, just that
Right.
sense of like it is so enthralling to be witnessed in vulnerability and to be enjoyed that deeply and to be desired that deeply can be literally orgasmic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this, and I think they get
Right.
hyper mechanical about like what are we doing here and how do we achieve what we're looking to achieve. And yeah, I mean, I don't need to get going about all that, but that's like a whole rabbit hole, and it sounds like we might be on the same page about
Right.
how this sort of reductionistic orientation to orgasm and sexual fulfillment and all that sort of stuff is yeah, it's a can of worms for sure. I think it's a way.
Any other themes you want to bring up from those sort of ancient lineages, or yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's,
thank you for
maybe there's
bringing
endless
that.
ones, but like, what's another really important one to highlight?
There is something that I have found to be intensely true and largely misunderstood is the difference between body intelligence and cognition.
Hmm.
And when we explore what is possible in sex from the processing capacity of the intuitive mind or the intuitive faculty rather than cognition, that we have, we could make an analogy to computer processing or like the level of processing that our body intelligence has versus our cognition and our thinking mind is just so grossly different. It's like just trying to think of a stupid analogy. One of my former mentors used to say it's like riding a tricycle when you have a supersonic jet. And, that's a pretty
Yeah.
silly metaphor, but like there is something profound about like if you think you know what sex is and you know how to meet a woman, a lot of the people that I work with are heterosexual men. So forgive me if I use very gendered language and heteronormative language, but it's just my I'm in the trenches with people on
Right.
a daily
Right.
basis, so that language is on the tip of my tongue. But there's something about like if you are really seeking to enjoy a woman and to take her places, and you're trying to do that by thinking about what to do, then the limitation is inherent and inescapable versus the things that you'll discover if you're actually feeling your way through an experience from intuition and deep listening and like body-based attunement or a word that a lot of men respond to is calibration. It's a good man's word.
Right.
Calibration.
Scientific.
Yeah, it's like we're engineers. That there's something about like using the intuitive mind and how that is connected to our instincts and something that is so much older and deeper and more nuanced. If we think about cognition just being maybe 20,000 years old in the way that we're used to it or something, and this fucking thing is like a few billion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't really understand what that means. And I've seen that sometimes laying it out like there is a process, a singular process, and that's it. That's all anything is the singular process of the unfolding of the intelligence of nature. And maybe, I'll say this kind of tongue in cheek, maybe there's a way to get in sync with that. Maybe there's a way to utilize that intelligence to be able to know things and do things that you would never be able to know with your cognition unless you were some kind of galactic channeler or whatever psychic medium. But like normal people I've seen are able to actually like drop their mind into their body with a little bit of practice and understanding of the process or technique of how to do that and to begin to touch. For one, this is something that I love doing with people in person is for them to get a real imprint, a real tactical experience of intuitively interacting with another person's body from the listening faculties of their own body. And that information is so profound, and that imprint people can take with them and be like, oh, I've been going about this all wrong. I've been trying to like learn what to do. And it's good to have techniques and to understand again in this thing of like what are the lineages that people have worked stuff out, and it's great to know
Right.
that. And at the same time, if you think that that is how you're going to have a great sex life, or you're going to fulfill a woman's deepest desires, you're wrong. That's not going
Yeah.
to work. Especially somebody who's really in their body, and somebody who really is open to going deep and to having a more embodied and subtle kind of energetically integrated experience of sex, that no matter how technically informed you are, it's not really going to feel right for a feminine person if it isn't informed by intuition. Like, women say all these things, they're like, oh, he just knew. He just knew. And it's like, I don't know, but some guys just have the thing. And it's like, I remember when I was in my 20s, I think this is maybe more so in a massage context, that someone is like, can you teach that? Like, what is that? Like, is it a you just have it or you don't kind of thing? And I've been in a big investigation of like, how can you actually support people to get in touch with that? And this is also the task of great art teachers, too. This is the task of a great music teacher or a great dance teacher, is like, yeah, we can learn, we can be technically proficient, but like, who fucking cares?
Right. If
Nobody,
it
you know
doesn't
what I
have,
mean? Yeah, if
yeah.
it doesn't move you, if it doesn't connect
Yeah.
to that sense of, and this is where we get into wooey language, if we don't connect to that spirit, that sense of like, yeah, that's the shit, like that's fucking cool, then what are we doing, right? Like, what that for me is like, life gets so dry when we don't understand how to participate in these more like spiritual or subjective things that are really about feeling. And something that I love about the subject of sex is that, like, you can have your theories all day, but like, what actually happens when two bodies come together?
Right. But you're saying you can learn this. It's not you're just born with it or not, right? This is something that can
Absolutely.
be developed to move
Absolutely.
someone.
It's something that can be developed. It's something that can be transmitted. So, there's ways that, like, by proxy or like literal entrainment, and this is like, I'm not, it's like we can talk about like wooey esoteric shit like spiritual transmission, but I think that there's something that science is catching up with, that my understanding the language is neurological entrainment, that there's a way that there can be information in my body that can end up in somebody's body if we understand how to downregulate and get into a receptive learning state, which is often a state of play as well. That, like, when we're in a more body intelligent place where there's more plasticity and receptivity, there's usually lower tone in the body, there's more regulation, our brainwave state is lower, and there's a sense of play and openness and physiological calm and safety where there can be real exchange. And then repetition, 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 like anything else, is we're building new synapses and all that sort of stuff. But, there are ways that people can find these imprints themselves. I really love this, let's call it a technology called belly to belly. Have you ever heard of this? I
I
mean,
haven't. I
it's
mean,
it's
not like officially. Yeah.
it's what you think it is.
Right.
If you and another person lay down belly to belly and you just hold each other in kind of lover's embrace and breathe deeply together, the body will kind of co-regulate, the bodies will co-regulate into a state of physiological calm and embodied safety. And this is a place where so much more intimacy and learning and exchange is possible. So, in doing group work, this is something that I often keep at the top of my little toolkit when exploring how
Right.
to build more resource and more capacity for deep learning and access what would really be meaningful and worthwhile. Is it's not just like mind stuff, it's also how do we get the body into a state where deep learning can actually happen? Because it's not just the words. There's information in that, but for
Right.
me, the work is as much, it's things to know, and it's also things to do.
Right.
And it's so much easier to get this information in people in real time than to be like, well, here it is, you go figure it out.
Do you have some other? I mean, I'm imagining somebody listening to this who's in a relationship, and are there some other just sort of tools or exercises or tips like that, something they could go and implement with a partner right
Sure.
away that drops them into more of their own sexual potential?
I'm sure you have plenty of things in your toolkit too, Jessa, which I'd be curious to maybe hear your top one or two. But yeah, belly to belly is a go-to. It's something that I think is really critical for people, and it's so natural. Like
Hmm.
we are large mammals that are built to regulate our nervous systems in physical intimacy with other large mammals. Like that's how our bodies are actually designed. For adults too. It's not just a fundamental part of development, but I mean, that's a whole other thing that we could talk about if we have time. But I think people really understanding how to get in a state of physiological calm with their lover is one of the most worthwhile things that you can practice and just have available, especially people who are in sexless relationships or people that feel like their lives are too hectic, is like, how do we just get really good at being very effective and efficient in dropping in together and really down regulating? This is kind of like technical language that might not mean anything to people, but to like just get into a state of calm
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
into a state of calm and relaxation and closeness with another person is actually easier than you go try to do it on your own and they go try to do it on your own and then you come together when you're calm. If you're just looking at like efficiency on a timeline, which I know a lot, I work with a lot of couples that are super busy and they're like, okay, what do we, how do we deal with this? And bookmark at talking about like why people are kind of misunderstanding the sexual process and the arousal process being so related to release, I think is because people don't actually understand how to get into a state of physiological calm. So the process of getting super horny or aroused with a person is kind of climactic and orienting towards a release of tension. And if you learn how to relieve tension by down regulating and getting into a state of calm, we can explore all over the map, including like, primal fucking and, tender lovemaking without there being this edge towards relieving the tension
Hmm.
because you're not using sex to relieve tension. You're using sex to have sex and you know how to not have tension in your body, right? Like this is interesting and I think a lot of people get really confused about this and I know that so many men are like that's what sex is like
Is
I feel pent up energy and then we fuck and it's passionate and then I climax and hopefully she does too and that's it. Like that's what sex is. Like that's the model that people have of what sexual behavior is. When we're not playing that game, the places that we can go are so vast and so meaningful and so beautiful and utterly life-changing. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's because you haven't experienced it. Because there are tons
right.
of people that will undeniably tell you that, like, I'm a different person because of the sexual experiences that I've had. And if you're in this tension release cycle thing, you can't even get horny enough to go there. The body does not sustain enough sexual charge. It's like you don't even have the capacity to go into that terrain until you can get over this addiction cycle of tension release. That's not even, I don't think that's what sex is. I think that this is a misunderstanding related to our frenetic
Yeah.
dysregulated embodiment as a culture where we're like in these brain taxis operating our bodies from a place that is inherently not body intelligent. And then we're doing something with our bodies and we're misunderstanding the game that we're playing because the whole thing is informed by a culture, not by nature, and not even by a culture that understands what great sex is. Like there's another kind of anecdote or framework that I find to be really useful is that like we all have a sexual operating system and most people's sexual operating system is informed by a culture that had absolutely no idea how people have a meaningful and fulfilling sex life. And if you look at the actual facts, like the statistics of sexless marriages and how fewer and fewer people are sexually active and how
Right.
younger and younger men have erection issues and how premature ejaculation is common. And so many women report numbness and pain during sex, or that they believe that they're fundamentally inorgasmic unless they have a Hitachi wand, and like all of this kind of stuff that's like, just as a quick seed to just name, my theories about why that is not desirable and it's super limiting are also rooted in observation of what happens physiologically when people have this certain kind of sexual behavior, where like so many women have dry and dead nerves and fascial adhesions and prolapsed urethras and uteruses and have, catastrophic childbirths and all of this stuff is like, it's not just like, oh, this is an idea about sex. It's like there are measurable physiological problems, dysfunction. It's so obvious if you look at the real clinicians that have
Mhm.
their hands on women's pelvises. This is clearly not for free that women have these really high stimulation relationships with sex toys. It's so damaging, right? Like this hyper normal stimulus and this misunderstanding that more stimulation is how we get more sensation and more satisfaction is a super mechanical and harmful way to relate to
Mhm.
your body. And like, who is this guy talking about what women should be doing with their pussies? Is like, yeah, I get it. And I stand for that. Like
But I assume it's the same thing on the male side, right? The
it
death
is.
grip and
It
jerking
is.
off and porn. And, it's the
Oh
same
my God.
hyper stimulation kind of approach.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is absolutely that. And I've spoken also to some real clinicians who have had their hands on thousands of penises. And this woman she's Spanish, she lives in the Netherlands. She said that out of the something like 1,500 to 2,000 men that she has done pelvic work on, she's pulled 1 to 4 inches of their dick out of their pelvic floor. That's just been like jammed up inside of them from their masturbation habits and often this psychological, like this psycho energetic emotional matrix of like being contracted and ill at ease and having sexual shame and all this sort of stuff that men have 1 to 4 centimeters of cock that's shoved up inside of their pelvic floor. 4 centimeters is like
Yeah, I
two.
was going to say that's probably kind of a motivating thought to people to maybe do this differently, right?
Well, yeah, but then a lot of people have no idea what to do. And that,
Yeah.
part of my passion, and I imagine your passion is like, what do we do? I think a
Yeah.
lot of people are arriving across the board, not just as it relates to sex, but the sense of like just going along with the thing that I inherited from this culture is not working.
Yeah.
It's not working. I'm not happy. My relationships are messed up. My parenting is not successful. I'm not well mentally. I'm out of shape. I'm like this is not working. Like I think a lot of people are accepting that like we need change as a culture. We need to do something different and we need to get creative and we need to take responsibility for doing something that actually gets us what we're looking for here. And there are some domains where I think we're quite progressive around this. Like obviously more systemic issues are hot topic and rightfully so. And then stuff related to health and stuff around food and environmental contamination and all this sort of stuff. And I see more trending around education and trauma awareness and all this sort of like people are waking up to the fact that we need to do something different, right?
Yeah.
And I think with sex, the we need to do something different is still highly misinformed.
Yeah.
It's still highly misinformed. I think a lot of people think that like, oh, I need to like do deep throat and anal and go to a swinger party and buy a vibrator and a cock ring and take all these drugs. Like that's the indoctrination that people are in is into this kind of extreme stuff. And not only is that incompatible with people's values and chosen lifestyle and makes it just seem kind of weird and inaccessible. I think it also plays into this very allopathic consideration of like, oh, if I want more libido, then I just take a pill, or I want, like all of this sort of stuff. Like if I'm having erection issues or premature ejaculation, I just need drugs.
Right.
And same thing with women. I know that there's a new pill that's coming out now that relates to like dryness and numbness and stuff during intercourse for females. And gosh, like what are we going to discover about the consequences of that later down the line? But
Yeah.
not to go into that so much, but there's something that I think is I'm talking really fast, but just to slow down and maybe connect to like there's something here that is like in people's heart of hearts, they know. I've had so many conversations with people where there's clearly a real yearning for something different. there's something in them that's just like, you know what? Like, I don't really know what it is that I'm called to, but like, it's something and it's not anything I've ever seen. And I want it and it matters. And like these words around like, intimacy and emotional connection are things that I'm hearing from more and more mainstream men that
Yeah.
are just fully, and even with their relationships with each other,
Yeah.
like straight men just being like, we need more intimacy. We need more real, positive, emotional connection amongst men. We need to normalize this. Like, we are not okay. This is not okay.
Well, and that must be their body knowledge speaking up, right? Like they're starting to connect to something almost viscerally, I would imagine. That's not their thinking, right? We need more emotional connection. There's something
It's a
yearning
great
physical.
point.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Yeah, like we're so good at rationalizing things out of our heads, but your body, I think, doesn't really let you do that.
Yeah.
The body won't lie in the same way that we can deceive ourselves in our heads. And I think the more people get into things like meditation and breath work, and even this kind of trend with like hot cold exposure and saunas and cold plunges may really be bringing this very like go-getter male population into their bodies in a way that the second wave might really be an emphasis on intimacy
Mm.
and like emotional intelligence by accident because these guys are paying attention to how they feel just on
Yeah.
a physical level, which is amazing. It's
Right.
amazing.
So, what's the basic? Tell me if this isn't the right question, but the path you take people on, like, what's the stages of the process that you
Sure.
that you help people with?
So, yeah, I do my in-person events are often co-ed, but my primary thing that I'm doing and have been doing for years is only for men, and it mostly is oriented towards heterosexual men, so men who have sex with women. And we have three levels. One of them is a foundational course that we call the Bedroom Genius Blueprint or the Men of Substance Blueprint. And level two is called the Higher Sex Operating System, which is basically just coming back to this analogy of like the sexual operating system that we inherited from this culture sucks, no pun intended. And we need a new one that actually works for people to have meaningful sexual lives and to not be hung up on sexual shame and conditioning. Or, we also get into relational stuff because a lot of the problems people have in sex don't have anything to do with sex.
Right.
The biggest limiting factor in a lot of people's sex life doesn't have anything to do with sex. It has to do with their relationship with taking responsibility and the understanding of projection and how to stay out of drama and how to basically just have a harmonious relationship with a woman. So there's a good amount of stuff in there, and the foundation of our work very much focuses on integrity. And when I use that word, I have to clarify because I don't really mean like values and ethics necessarily. I mean wholeness and being
Right.
in the right relationship with who you are. And etymologically, that word means like historically, it means being intact, being
Right.
whole.
Right.
So when they talk about integrity and sexual integrity, it's like, are you in right relationship with yourself?
Yeah.
Are is there some part of your nature and who you really are and what really matters to you that you're not taking responsibility for? And also what ends up happening when a lot of people get that idea is entitlement kicks in and then they want to blame their wife. So it's not that either, right? Like this is
Right.
a huge issue is that I think a lot of people feel extremely desperate or in a state of just feeling helpless because they have this story that like she is the reason why I don't have a better sex life. It's her fault.
Yeah.
Like she's not into the things that I'm into. If she was more sexually open and adventurous, if she had higher libido and sex drive, it's her,
Right.
right? It's like it's not to say that women are not culpable for the issues in relationships, but there's a point where it's like you got to look at what you can change, right? Like
Right.
you have to look at where you can take responsibility for doing something different. And if you've really maxed all that out, which basically nobody has, and you're still not
Right.
ready to change, then that's a worthwhile conversation, right? And there's stuff about like fundamental chemistry and incompatibility issues, but from what I've seen, that's like almost nobody who thinks that that's who they are, right? Like there's so much, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here that there's just so much that people can take responsibility for just their side of a sexual
Right.
relationship.
Right.
And we also get into a lot of the juicy stuff, like people also want to understand technical, practical skills about how to explore the terrain, and we get into a lot of stuff that's a trauma-informed approach and understanding of how we basically develop what people call the shadow or personas that keep us away from our innate ranges in the different aspects of our sexuality. Like we talked about taking. Taking is a range in masculine sexual expression that feels super taboo and even unsafe for a lot of men. And they often really light up when it's affirmed and validated and not made wrong, that part of you that just wants to devour her and take and take and take. And even the part of you that's kind of irreverent and just wants to use her, like that's a part of all of us. And I know when I say all of us, some people might be like, "Oh, not me, meh." And from what I've seen, that's not true. It's
Yeah.
often just because this is not within range that it just feels unsafe, right? And this is also a really great feature of doing this work in groups is that men get to learn by proxy what it feels like to embody these ranges by men sharing their wins and sharing, like really owning and claiming that, like, hell yeah, like this feels so good and my wife is so into it, that information and that exposure can really help people to face their own shit basically. And that's also a part of the process where there's a big sense of like you're in, there's no part of your process and your experience that isn't a part of this container here. And there's a lot of stuff that we obviously can't do online just for safety. It's so much easier to do things where we really get into kind of cracking the shell of things that may be really charged and relate to trauma and deep conditioning, and I've been there, like I
Mm-hmm.
came from a religious household, and we read the Bible and prayed at night every day, and there was so much story about sex in my community and all this sort of stuff, and I come from that, and then also got really into porn when I was in my early teenage years and have come from just so much performance anxiety and shame and confusion about my sexuality and feeling inadequate and all that. So, I mean, I've been there. If this works for
Right.
me, if it works for me, I mean, I'm exhibit A that this is
Yeah.
a viable process. And it's also something that we've really worked out with tons of different men from different backgrounds over the years. And back to your question of what is the process? So there's basically three levels in the way that my work is structured. There's the foundation, so the blueprint. There's the higher sex operating system. And then there's the men of substance community, basically. And
Right.
it's a community membership model, basically. And it's amazing. It's an amazing group of people. There's such a high level of dedication. And there's also an understanding that this is not just about sex. Like this is kind of crazy sometimes when people first hear me say it, it makes people scratch their head. But the sense that like the path of sexual mastery is a vehicle to realizing human potential is something that
Mm-hmm.
people just really don't get what that is until they start to chew on it a bit. And I've seen time and time again that people have more energy, the quality of their relationships with their children improves, their sense of direction in their life and their relationship with their own creativity and a sense of purpose shifts, the quality of their marriage obviously changes, that this is a way to really work on so many different layers of ourselves as men and as people
Mm-hmm.
that I put it like this, that like if you go to a random guy and you're just like, "Hey, do you want to like focus on your personal development and your emotional intelligence?" That he's like, "Not really, bro. I got shit to
Right.
you know."
Right.
But if you're like, "Hey, do you want to have the best sex of your life over and over again and give the woman you love the most amazing orgasms humanly possible?" That he's like, yeah,
Duh. Yeah. Yeah.
duh. Like, show me a guy who doesn't. No, and it's like, okay, well, I wouldn't know how to help you get that outcome unless we were going to get into a conversation about
Right.
personal integrity and self-responsibility and self-awareness and these things
Right.
that are really at the foundation of personal development and even spirituality.
Yeah.
So and it's not like I'm doing like a bait and switch here with the people who come into my ecosystem, but it really is so clear, especially to the people who have been in the work for a long time, that like this is so much more than what happens between the sheets, so to say, that
Yeah.
there are holistic, obvious, undeniable changes that these men and all of the people that are closest to them report over and over and over and over again. Like, I feel better in my body. I feel like more connected to all of my friends. And it's not like we're having orgies now or whatever. Like, there's
Right,
not
right.
curvy, but people are just like, my relationship with my kids are better. Like the quality of presence that I have, this practice of really using my body to attune to people and understanding my own nervous system is critical in us having more quality relationships and just better self-awareness so that we can take responsibility for creating what we actually care about instead of just getting yanked around by all these invisible forces of our nervous system and our subconscious mind that you have to work that out to be able to have a great sex life.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyways, those are the three stages, and I also work with people one on one, but that's super
Yeah.
limited. I only work with a couple people at a time.
Right, right. I mean, really cool and impactful. Where do people find you? How do they reach out? Which I'm sure they're going to want to do after this conversation.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Well, my name, Rob Kancler, so RobKancler.com. And same Rob Kancler on all socials. You can find me around on the internet. If you just type in my name anywhere, you'll find some stuff. And I'm fairly easy to find, or at least my team is easy to get in touch with. And yeah, I'm here to help. I'm in the trenches very much. And I imagine for the next several years, we're riding the wave and kind of building out this body of work and opportunities for people both in person and online. And as of now, which we're mid late August 2025, I think we're probably 6 months away from launching a program for women, maybe a bit shorter. My focus has been on really making this more available for men, but almost every week I get either a request for a referral or a request for women to have an opportunity to get access to the stuff that we do in the Men of Substance container. So working title will be Women of Essence, and I have some amazing female colleagues that I will be putting that on with. And it's not set in stone, but that's likely to be coming down the pipe in the next couple months as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Do you have maybe one tool per your question to me? Like, what is one thing that couples can do? Oh, and I think I actually did a kind of poor job of it of explaining what you can do. Is it okay if I go back to that really
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, absolutely.
So the practice of belly to belly is simply you lay down in a lover's embrace type of situation. Sometimes it can be awkward with the like chicken wing. Do you put the arm behind you? Like,
Right.
what do you do? But like just get belly to belly with the person that you're gonna practice with, or just do this simple little exercise with. And you can either be like cheek to cheek, or you can be looking into each other's eyes, whatever just feels like a natural, comfortable way to be. And just take long, slow, deep breaths together for a while. And if you really want to go the full cycle, you could set a timer for 7 minutes or even 20 minutes and really practice long, deep, full breathing in synchronization with your partner and just see what that's like. I often like to, especially at first, not kind of say too much about what will happen, but it can be profound. I've
Yeah.
had people report like MDMA like experiences from doing this kind of practice, or at least a reliable way to get into that
Mm.
sort of physiological calm and feeling of closeness with a partner, especially for folks who have really hectic days where it's like, okay, we only have an hour for sex, is like, yeah, spend the first 20 minutes just getting into a deep state of resourcefulness and calm and regulation and connection. I think that that's an absolutely worthwhile thing to do is like really work with the nervous system and how it works and to, participate in the how of consciousness instead of just being like, God, it's to just be like, okay, well, it is the way it is in a way that is relatively understandable, and we can just take responsibility for driving these meat suits in a way that actually works for us getting what we want instead of folks just feeling stressed and challenged. So
Yeah.
again, just taking time to really, you know, nourish one another through taking advantage of how our bodies work. And it's also
Right,
just nice. It's really
right.
nice.
Well, the one that it comes to mind, and it comes from Stan Tatkin, is where I learned it, the lover's pose, where you're on a couch, one person's sitting up, the other person lies with their head in their lap, and you make eye contact, and the person who's sitting has one hand on their heart, belly, and one hand on their head. And again,
That's awesome.
yeah, and again, it's eye contact and co-regulation, and similar vibe.
And is that given as just like a presence-based practice or also to share words?
No, just presence. I mean, sometimes people talk in it, but the idea is you're just being there, making eye contact, not
Mhm.
talking, just settling in and dropping into co-regulation.
Hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It makes me think of this research from the Heart Math Institute. Are you familiar with that
I
organization?
I know the name, but I haven't talked to anybody from there.
They've done pretty extensive research with EEG and EKG, which basically just reading people's brains and their hearts. And they found that um, I don't remember the actual stats of the study, but they put lots and lots of people basically knee to knee in a chair with each other and just monitored their brains and their hearts. And just simply being there together, your brainwave states and your neural oscillations and the rhythm of your heart syncs up after about 20 minutes with
Yeah,
basically everybody. That like
yeah,
if you just sit down with a complete stranger, your biological systems entrain with each other. If you're in a state of safety, like
yeah.
if it's social engagement, physical safety, that happens. If not, not.
Right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, like if you feel safe with another person, just simply being in the same environment as them, our bodies entrain with each other. That's amazing.
It's really is amazing. It really is the knowledge that's baked in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it brings up things that like, to go back to what different spiritual traditions have found is that people that are able to access unusual states of consciousness and of embodiment, that there is a way to entrain with that and then benefit from their attainment, let's say, and this is well established of like you
Wow.
sit at the feet of the guru and you receive a transmission of his consciousness, I think is actually just another expression of entrainment.
Wow.
The person with such a coherent field, such a coherent system that has so much potency, and also the context is set up that that's what we're here to do, that I think that there's a real opportunity. And in Sanskrit, there's this term Shaktipat and also Shivapat, which is either a transmission of energy and embodied information or a transmission of consciousness. And these experiences are very real. And
Mm,
it's something that I've experienced many, many times. It's not as mystical as it might sound. These are real things that our bodies do, and they're not even metaphysical. Like maybe on some level they are, but there's a real physiological component that is accessible in your bedroom by really just understanding the fundamental kind of principles of how consciousness and embodiment works and how we can take more responsibility for collaborating with our nature so that we can have the kind of experiences that we're looking for. And this is, as far as I can tell, this is one of the biggest unlocks for people and for couples is to just have a more body intelligent approach to their sexual lives and to their intimacy so that they're not in this kind of uphill battle because your body doesn't work that way. Right. And we could go
yeah.
so much deeper into this as it relates to orgasm and understanding like really where we might want to go when we're not just kind of like on a totally corrupted baseline,
Right.
but where we could really look at in terms of orgasm and orgasmic affect and the different kind of sexual things that in the absence of this understanding, people keep looking for a more extreme sexual behavior to satisfy that thing. So they keep seeking novelty and spectacle and increased
In,
stimulation and
intensity. Right. Right.
exactly. It's more novelty, more intensity, more extreme sexual behavior because we're missing where the real pathway is to getting what we want. And it's not rocket science. You just have to
Right.
learn. Nobody taught us. It's not our
Right.
fault. But
Part
yeah.
of what I like about this conversation is the idea that I don't know. I think people can hear this and think, "Oh, this is beyond me," or "It's too intimidating," or "It's too much," and but the basic message is this is baked into all of our bodies.
Yes.
right? We all have access to this. It is not something that takes an exceptional person or some rare being. It's like this
Absolutely
is
not.
just human.
Absolute. Like I mean, there's like there's like construction workers and like truck drivers in my program. Like there's also people who are more like spiritual seekers and are more self-help and personal growth oriented. Then there's just like a bunch of regular fucking guys, like just like good old boys.
Yeah.
And, it's not rocket science, but it does take clear direction. And I think we've done an incredible job at laying out the process in a way that people can go through in 1 month. It's just a 4 week program. Level one is just a 4 week program, and it's just online. You just do a Zoom call. There's a little bit of homework that,
Yeah.
pretty straightforward, and we've really leaned into what is the most efficient and effective way to reliably get this information in the minds and bodies of regular people.
Right.
So
Cool.
it's here for the taking. If people feel drawn, come find me.
I hope they do. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you feel compelled to have a round two, we could dig deeper into so many different directions that we touched on here. But thank you so much, Jessa. Thank you. Really do appreciate the opportunity.